Welcome to the 4G wireless evolution. I'm Joe Mazzio. I'm a partner in the Crossfire Group. I work with Carl on a regular basis. You know what kind of challenges that means for me. In the panel we have today Mark, Kai, and Hems. And the three gentlemen represent three wonderful corporations, as you can see, RIM, Intel, and Qualcomm. And they're here to give us some feel for what the world of LTE versus WIMAX is right now. I just figured I'd write out a couple of questions and we'd see where we go from here at the end, see whether or not we've gotten our answers or we have many, many more questions. What are the issues associated with building out the bandwidth and the backhaul? When will LTE be ready for prime time? Is the success of LTE dependent on the success of WIMAX, as some have stated at this podium as early as this morning? And will Apple and Google make all the difference, or just ride the rails that the consumers adopt? Will the device manufacturers stay technology agnostic and do both, or do both? Is the winner actually the first network that lets all 6 of my devices on for $40 a month in the U.S. or $60 a month globally? And does it really make a difference who brings us 4G? So those are kind of my questions. And with that, what I want to do is I want to turn it over to Mark. Have Mark tell you, Mark is vice president with RIM, has been with them a goodly number of years. He holds over 100 patents in mobile technologies, and he's an all-around good guy. So, Mark, you want to go first?
Sure. Just put it down. Oh, thanks. So, thanks. I'm going to just first of all talk about kind of what Lte and Ymax are about from a relatively high level. These are the two primary next-gen technologies for what we think 4G might be. We don't know what 4G is, by the way. It hasn't been defined yet. Maybe in 2011, at Work 2011, we might have a definition. These are estimated deployment dates. And there's some fluidity too in these deployment dates. First, you got the 3GPP track, which is LTE. You got the WIMAX track, the IEEE track, which is WIMAX. Industry vision. This is pretty aggressive in terms of requirements. High data rates, more than 100 megabits per second. Now that is 100 megabits per second sector throughput. Okay, like I don't think your device is going to do that. Scalable bandwidth, 1.25 or 1.4 to 20 megahertz. Spectral efficiency, low latency. Optimized for VoIP voice services and backward compatible with the existing stuff. Now, if I go back to 1996, when we let's say we had these same bubbles here in 1996, they were pretty much the same thing with lower numbers. Okay, so just to put it in perspective. LTE is generally the most industry support as the next generation in 3GPP. Like UMTS and GSM, it's standardized within that standards body, which is overseen by ETSI still. It's also designed to interoperate with these technologies, and we're fairly well invested in both WIMAX and LTE in our research and prototyping, so we're kind of a bit on the balanced side here. LTE uses OFDM. You've got these little sink-shaped spectra, and you put them together and they look orthogonal mathematically, but in reality they're not, because you get, especially in a room like this, you get short-range reflections off of hard surfaces, and you get some delay spread that kind of causes these things to have intersymbol interference, even though you're not supposed to have it. Basically, the idea is that you take a fast data stream and you splay it out into 1,300 or so little slow ones. It's kind of like getting hit by something at 1,300 miles an hour versus 1 mile an hour or something. But the whole principle is that it's more tractable to do mathematically. So if you've got fading across a wide frequency range, you can certainly mitigate the mobility-related impairments fairly quickly and fairly easily from a processor perspective. You also have flexible spectrum. Now it's really 1.4 megahertz because it was being debated at this point. And the idea there is that your operator could just grow into the spectrum as it's needed and simply deploy more and more LTE across the spectrum. Another characteristic of LTE is you got these amazingly smart base stations, these E-node Bs here. What you've got for 2G and 3G is that little blue thing on the bottom, where it ends up at the top of the stack is PDCP, the Packet Data Convergence Protocol. All that yellow stuff is new. Now, what does that mean? It means you can do a lot. The network architecture is a lot simpler, but it also means that for the device, for the phone, like I'm a device manufacturer these days. I've made base stations in the past, but you've got to mirror that stuff. So you have to talk to the base station at those levels. So it adds some complexity. But as you can see, there's not too much to the core network. It's pretty flat. You've got micromobility around that little X4 interface, is that green thing, and then you've got macromobility, which can hand you over and take care of all the billing and all that. The handing over between clusters of these E-node Bs is the MME's responsibility, and then of course the MME, or the E-node Bs themselves, can hand you around its little environment there. It's also backward compatible with GSM and UMTS. So the idea is that you can easily go back to the old legacy stuff. WIMAX is similar to LTE in the sense that they both use OFDM or OFDMA access technology. It's being standardized by IEEE, which is different. And two major differences is that there is no standard core network like LTE, where everything's standard. You must make the X4 or S1 or S2 interfaces exactly as written. No such thing for WIMAX yet. The other thing is you have no macro mobility like cellular or LTE, and you see it's sort of typified by this thing here. You've got you can put a custom core network in like this. Or if you're an ISP, you can just go right to the internet, put a little billing stuff in the between. So the good and the bad of it is that the good is that you can only put in what you need, right? The not so good is that whoever you hire to build your custom core network is probably going to do it differently than the people who build your core network in another city, and your stuff probably won't even talk to itself very well. This is a constant problem for operators in general. The other thing is that there is mobility. There's some micromobility between these, but there is no macro mobility. If you had another little cluster of that, you will drop the call. We do a lot of things with WIMAX. Some of the segmentation, some of the market segments that you are considered are, say, the last few kilometers to the subscriber. If you don't have fiber or copper or whatever, you can use it as a cellular backhaul. Office, campus. I mean, there's many things you can do. And I think as we discussed in the other forum is that both LTE and WIMAX support data today. There's 4 different proposals to do voice, and the industry has yet to really decide on which one. So the 3GPP and company participants have decided to do all of them, and we hope to see something pop out at the 09 release. Now, there's challenges for both these technologies, and I wanted to kind of show you this. If you think about wireless capacity for a second, this is really interesting. If you go back to 1957 and you go up to today, and you take 1 megahertz of spectrum, and that same 1 megahertz today carries basically about 1 million times or more information than that 1 megahertz did in 1957. That's a huge gain. If you break these gains down, you see that there's information theoretic improvements of 25x, and say, modulation schemes, coding schemes, advanced receivers, joint detection, all that kind of stuff. There's another 25x, statistical improvement, which is where you have, contiguous spectrum. Your scheduling algorithms, the fact that you got these 1,000 some odd carriers, and let's say 6 of them come available, you just jump on it, you can make sure that the pipe is full. But the bulk of the gain across these 50 some odd years is due to simply reducing the cell sizes or the transmit distance. And that's extremely important, because if you want to get true broadband performance out of these things, you've got to have more cell density. And this looks like an exaggeration, and it looks like, maybe it's pessimistic. But I'll tell you what, you go take a look at this, look at Shannon's theorem, and that B on the left side is also contained in N on the right, on that bottom part there, because its KTB is N. So you can't just say, I'm going to just extend the bandwidth of what I occupy spectrally and just keep jacking up the speed. Because basically what you're saying is that your capacity or your data rate is dependent on two things: how much spectrum you occupy and how good your signal is. And if you look on the right there, that's a real example. That's going from 8 PSK, 3 bits per symbol, to 6 bits per symbol. And you need more than 6 times your power to do this. That's just to double it. Man, I mean, what about going to 300 megabits per second? Are you going to have 600 times? You don't want, I don't think you want 250 watts next to your head or whatever, but be that as it may, even if that were possible, your battery life would be in the order of seconds, right? So how do you do this? The most effective way is just increase the number of, use the inverse square law to your advantage. Put in more base stations or relays or something that can help you cover this. So that's a serious challenge. Here's another one. LTE assumes that the mobile has at least 2 antennas for MIMO. Now, the nice thing about this is that you have like 4 little vectors. You can mathematically tweak on those and produce some gains in capacity and so on. The bad part is that you got this. This is okay. The thing on the right is okay for the lab. But for a real product, you got to do better than that. I don't know if you guys realize that this device here has got a 4-band antenna down here, right? That's for cellular. That's 1800, 1900, 850, 900. We have 2 Wi-Fi antennas, which are 5.6 and 2.4 gig. We got another 2.4 gig because you can't diplex them, right? For Bluetooth, and there's a 1.6 gig for GPS. So this is a serious issue. Where are we going to put all these antennas? For if we decide to do these things for the next generation. The other thing is this device is going to have even more bands in it, more banded antennas or more antennas, because we have 700 megahertz coming in. We've got 1710 to 1755, 2110 to 2155, 2500 to 2690, and I don't know, maybe 3500. So that's a serious practical issue. The other one is, this is an interesting phenomenon here that some countries look like the top and some countries look like the bottom. The U.S. looks kind of like the bottom. And this is difficult because there's these, it's hard to get this contiguous spectrum to one operator at a time. There's 2 problems here. Number one is that OFDM or OFDMA only gives you really the kind of statistical gains that you're looking for if you occupy more than 10 megahertz of spectrum. Because it gives you that large number of carriers where you can just keep these things full, handle different users, different logical channels, so to speak. The other thing is, if you look at there's only one guard band here. Let's say that's 500 kilohertz, right? Half a megahertz. Now down here there's 2, 4, 6, 8 of those things. So basically, you have actually blown away 4 megahertz on the bottom for kind of nothing, because you've got to protect each other. So that's another challenge. So, comments, questions
from us?
Any questions before we move on to Kai? Okay. Come on, Kai.
Okay. I'm going to switch to that topic.
Right over here.
Yeah, we'll switch over. Good job, right? What's that? That's a good job. The 90 range it's interesting. It's fascinating. Yeah, it's true. We have to edit and support all that stuff. That's just and that's the stuff people don't like to hear, but we have to do this for them like this.
Okay. Oh.
Remember, Kai, Intel can get anything to work.
Windows?
Coming up. 1, 2.
Throw in a little Microsoft.
No, 11.
You see this thing is Microsoft and Nokia TVs up to fleet rid. We're a tiny little company, man. Don't worry. I realized, I was thinking, we must be doing something right. Two giant companies are teaming up. Then later, I was walking in downtown Waterloo, and I thought, that's not the case at all. Yeah.
No, that's true.
A big old software company that forgot how to make software.
Sometimes
Combined
different.
with a big old mobile company that forgot how to make radios joining together. Nature really trying to carve out.
Can't find it.
Function and stuff.
I know. Did.
This is the part there. Speaking during when they said, well, just do your presentation without your slides because you never know.
Doesn't like my laptop.
That's right. Unfortunately, we didn't have no slides. So.
Kai's now going to do a dance.
Hold on. Be patient.
There we go.
No, it's
Get the black screen of that.
I know what happened to my laptop here.
It's in weird computer.
They don't like each other. Yes.
They don't like each other. Is that a technical explanation?
It's not. It's my own explanation.
At least every year, my parents are from Toronto.
Oh, Toronto.
Yeah, so I get back there.
Yeah,
That's weird.
Once or twice a year. I still every now and then we'll drive out to Waterloo.
Yeah.
Just like
Well, look like I have to here, right?
It's really changed.
Really,
It's really changed.
weird.
That's incredible.
It's changed.
But I'm gonna come back again.
Yeah, huge change.
Yours,
Think a lot of that's attributed
yours
to
just went right off.
Yeah.
So mine.
It's Mike and Jim. Yeah, Mike found it for Institute of Physics and stuff.
Okay.
And, we have CV, Secretary of National Guard Salvation, Mike Chendon.
That's right.
He's got a lot of
Yeah, sorry about that. So my topic going to be more on WIMAX because Intel is pretty much a company that's driving WIMAX in the industry, and realizing LTE also upcoming. So basically, these two are quite similar in terms of technology and capability. But my talk will be more on WIMAX, in particular on the enterprise usage of WIMAX because it's happening. So that seems to be a new trend these days. This a new direction. So let me talk about that. Hold on, let me get back.
He rebooted. Oh, okay.
I was telling Mark, it's because he has an AMD machine.
I couldn't find Scott's.
Excuse me?
I couldn't find Scott's PowerPoint.
What kind of power?
Just getting up the computer.
Which one is that mic card?
Does he have a Mac here?
No, it should work. Yeah, let me just try.
It's okay with me if you yell, so I'm going to go find some support staff.
Or you can use this mic.
Okay, should be. That should be okay.
I don't know, decide, we'll just talk.
Hey, you want to hold for a minute? Kai and Hems go, and then
Okay.
we'll try to get you support. And,
Yeah.
And
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. I'm Hearns. I work for Qualcomm. Since we're not a technology company, I don't have any technology issues or slides to show you, so I'll just talk. I actually wasn't really aware of the format of the panel, so I'll apologize in advance. I just had some ideas I want to share with you, and furthermore, I actually really just want to answer your questions and try to clarify some of these technology debates at least from our perspective. So first off, I'll say, the wireless space is very complex. There's a lot of dynamics that drive the industry to go in one direction or another. Technology is only one facet of that, and I think we're getting to a point where technology is actually one of the less important facets that distinguishes one set of vendors or operators from one another. That said, what is it that's going to drive a given technology to be successful, whether it's WIMAX or LTE or HSPA or EVDO or 1X? I can throw out tons of acronyms your way. I think it really boils down to three predominant factors, notwithstanding the solutions that people are looking for or the problems they're trying to solve. So number one, what is the ecosystem surrounding the technology, and what is it able to provide? And by ecosystem, I'm referring not just to how many companies do we have in our ecosystem, but are there successful operators who can offer you services? Are the devices that you need available? Are they available for the appropriate frequency bands? Are they for the appropriate market segment? Are they available for the appropriate vertical application? There's a myriad of issues that affect whether or not a solution will fit a given problem. There's the economics. So we call them the three E's: the ecosystem, the economics, and the evolution path. The economics is pretty straightforward. I think both operators, vendors, and consumers from an enterprise perspective are in business to stay in business, and that means you need to make money. So your revenue stream is important, and your cost basis is important. And lastly, the evolution path I think is very important because technology is not static, which means that whatever you deploy today needs to be able to evolve to meet your changing needs, and needs to be able to provide you improvements in performance and reductions in cost over time. So those are your three dominant factors that affect which technologies are successful in the marketplace. If we look at the introduction of WIMAX and LTE into the wireless space, I'll say that I don't want to speak from the perspective of a vacuum. Is there any wireless technology out there today? Does anyone have a phone in their pocket? Is anyone accessing the internet from their notebook or with a smartphone? In fact, Mark's company has some very interesting products, very effective products, allowing you to communicate back with your enterprise in a mobile environment today. So I think we're starting from a basis of what already exists, and we look at how do we leverage new technologies to help us do things better. Sounds simple enough, but the reality is trying to integrate a new technology into an existing environment, and if you will, legacy, takes some astuteness and it takes time. So the first thing I'll say is expectations need to be reasonable, they need to be realistic. It takes 6 to 7 years, and it has taken, actually, if I look back from the beginnings of wireless network deployments, 6 to 7 years for any dominant technologies to actually reach critical mass, 50 million people. It was the case for GSM, it was the case for 1X, it was the case for EVDO, it's the case for HSPA now, it will be the case for LTE. It has been, and actually we're not quite at the cusp of that, for the case for WIMAX. So from the moment the standard is finalized till you see 50 million people using devices out there on that technology, it takes time. So regardless of what promises we make, I think we need to set the realistic expectation that attaining that scale, which will give us the economies that we need, will take time. All right, we've got some slides. So where do WIMAX and LTE come into this puzzle? And is it really WIMAX versus LTE? I don't really think so. I don't think that's really an important aspect to where we're going to go from where we are today. I think one of the big problems we have from a data enablement and data performance in a wireless environment is the fact that we're looking at air and not piece of fiber or a piece of copper. Air has different characteristics, and Mark walked you through some of the aspects of what happens as you get further away from a cell. He talked also about some of the different techniques you can use to try to address or mitigate interference, multiple antennas. He talked about different ways to leverage multiple paths to overload, if you will, the channel and deliver two different streams using the same channel and frequency at the same time. So these are different ways we can use to try to share this channel more efficiently. But the reality is you're sharing a chunk of spectrum. You're sharing a channel. When you share a channel, some interesting things happen. You can only have it for a certain amount of time. So you have to share that channel either over time or in frequency. And OFDMA allows us to do that across both those dimensions. But is it really going to be all that different from what we have today? So Mark talked about Shannon's limit and the fact that in a noisy channel, whether it's fiber or copper or air, you can only get so much data through that channel subject to the vagaries of noise, subject to the amount of bandwidth that's available to you. Same applies for air. So we're approaching, with current technologies, the theoretical limits of what you can get out of a hertz. So spectral efficiency, capacity divided by amount of frequency. I don't want to take up all the time. So Joe, if you need to yank me off, gong show style, I'll stop. So their spectral efficiency is not going to get dramatically better from where we are today. So how do you scale for more data demand? Because data demand is increasing much faster than the capabilities of our networks and our devices to provide that. Well, you have a few options in your tool chest. You can use more spectrum, so the B term in Shannon's limit. Bigger channels will mean more data. That is not increasing the efficiency, that's just using a bigger pipe. Think of it as a bigger garden hose. You can let more water through. You can use 3 garden hoses to let 3 times as much water through. There's no difference. They're multi-carrier or a bigger channel. That's one approach, and I think that's where we're going to leverage the LTEs or the WIMAXs, is when we need a bigger channel. Oh, we're going to get to power. So you need a bigger channel for certain applications. And LTE or OFDMA systems scale better to bigger channels beyond 10 megahertz because, as Mark was saying, the overhead for OFDMA to mitigate intersymbol interference, which is really noise cancellation in a way, is constant. So that same amount of water that you're wasting with the hole in the hose, well, if you have a bigger hose but the hole's the same size, you're still wasting the same amount of water. You're getting more data through to where you want it, which is your LAN. All right? So scaling up is great. Scaling down is not. Why? Because that hole is the same size. You have a smaller pipe. You can get less water through it. More of it's coming out the hole. So FDMA is great beyond 10 megahertz, more efficient, more cost-effective as far as doing interference cancellation, less complex. When you look at smaller channels, you get the reverse effect. So 10 megahertz is roughly kind of the in-between point. So if we have cases where there are smaller channels out there, and we already have other technologies deployed in those frequency bands, such as what Verizon or AT&T or Sprint or all the other carriers out there in the world have, you're not going to want to replace what you have, economics notwithstanding, to deploy something that has the same or less capacity. So that, I think that's one barrier to this notion of transition, that we're going to replace where we are today. 2, well, does everyone in the room need a 20 megahertz channel? And if you do, how much are you willing to pay for it is perhaps another question. So spectrum isn't cheap. And operators share that channel across a lot of users to distribute the cost and bring the cost basis down for everybody. So I think the realistic expectation that we need to set as an industry is that when we look at the LTEs and the WIMAXs for the bigger channels, the use cases where we're going to give that kind of capacity to one individual user are small. We don't have the business models to be able to monetize that and to make it make sense. We looking at other ways to scale or increase capacity. I mentioned there are 4 different ways. So we talked about the bandwidth angle. As Mark mentioned, bring the user closer to the cell is another way to do that, because you're using less power, and also you can achieve greater data rates because there's less interference based on the fact your signal is much stronger. So your signal-noise ratio is higher. So that's another approach. That translates into femtocells, picocells, smaller cells, micro network. But again, I'm not talking about just doing a micro network. That is extraordinarily expensive because you need to get backhaul to each of these little cells. It's also not very effective for certain applications, such as if you're in a car going 60 miles per hour, you're switching cells every quarter of a second. So again, not every solution solves every problem. You really need to look at which one of these you can leverage for different scenarios. A third approach is to, and Mark talked about this as well, use more antennas. You use 2 antennas, you can mitigate interference in various ways. I won't go into the details. It improves your signal-noise ratio, so receive diversity. If you want to get really clever and send the signal along different vectors, like MIMO, you can get even more, or you can theoretically double the data rate and capacity. But there again, that doesn't apply in every environment. You can't use MIMO when you're far away from the cell and you don't have good signal-to-noise ratio. The fourth way is to, what was the fourth way? I lost myself in any event. The fourth technique involves, gosh, it's really not coming to mind. Later on, I'll mention it for you. So in any event, these are some of the basic or predominant tools that operators have at their disposal as they try to scale or increase capacity. Actually, I just remembered the fourth. It involves leveraging the different points in your network that are underutilized. Think of cell sites as different nodes that are, in some cases, heavily loaded, in other cases, underutilized. If you can distribute or load balance that load across the networks, think of it as you have some major freeways that are congested, you have parallel roads that don't have any traffic on them, redirecting the cars to the streets and the highways that aren't congested redistributes the load. You still have the same amount of data going through, but you've decreased the amount of time that it takes to get from point A to B, so you're increasing the effective throughput. So these are different tools operators can use, and they will leverage these tools depending on which problem they're trying to solve. If they want to deliver high speeds to you inside of your house for broadband applications, are they going to blast you with a 50-watt transmitter for LTE for a wide area network, or 3G for that matter? No. They may use a femtocell as long as you have backhaul in your house. They may use a combination of different types of cells to serve you different applications along different paths or barriers. So the last message I'll leave you with is I really think as we go forward and our needs for more data capacity become more apparent and we figure out the business models of how to charge for it, we're looking at having to leverage every path at our disposal. And by every path, I mean we need to get the greatest efficiencies that we can out of 800 megahertz spectrum. Every efficiency we can get out of 1900. Every efficiency we can get out of 2100. So we need to improve and refine what's currently deployed in those bands, A. B, we need to augment by adding more spectrum to the equation by adding new frequency bands. So we're talking about Lte or WIMAX at 2.5 gigahertz or 3.5 gigahertz. We're adding capacity to our network. And we need to leverage some of these other barriers in smaller networks. So in effect, we're looking at a future in which we will need all of these different technologies, including wireline, to leverage the most appropriate channel or bearer to be able to deliver that massive amount of data to everyone in a cost-effective manner and at the speeds that people are willing to pay for. And I don't think any one technology is going to solve that for us. So we need multi-mode.
And non-partisan approach. Now, Kai, can you give us a partisan approach?
Any questions for him before I start?
Yeah, sure. No, please.
Start? Okay.
Ready?
All right, so let me talk about the enterprise usages of WIMAX. I think I agree with him that there's been multiple technologies that in parallel. And right now, right, WIMAX as a 4G technology, quote unquote, right, is slightly ahead of the LTE side. And so therefore, some activities here in the marketplace are emerging, as we noticed so far, are interesting. So let me give you some report here. So anyway, from the overall industry perspective, right? So enterprise is in the transformation, as we know. Basically, broadband wireless is a driver, so is cloud computing and consumerization of IT, and also context-aware computing, right? As a result, right, as you can see here, there'll be, in the future, we're at the point that additional usage models will be coming up with new capabilities for the enterprise and also running more efficiently for the enterprise that's coming, while the existing ones are continuing, right? So that's the current situation here. So because we're going to talk about WIMAX here, we're going to focus on the broadband wireless side of the picture here, right? So overall, WIMAX right now is a huge momentum globally. We can see here in this slide. So right now there are 450 planned for commercial deployment happening right now globally, right? Already. Because WIMAX is ahead of the LTE side, so therefore there's equipment available and over 20 vendors producing base stations, and also over 100 companies that are offering 350 client devices right now. So you can see here a lot of things are already there. My slide doesn't move. I can only see there. Okay, but anyway, so. From the usage perspective, right? So right now we're in this stage, consumer side of it, the market, right? So meaning that right now providers are providing services for the consumer market, but right now that's not the only thing that's happening. We have already started seeing the other side of the market started coming up, consumer. In addition to the consumer side, enterprise, for example. Right, because WIMAX can also be used in the consumer market. In particular, also go beyond the consumer and the enterprise, the wireless city side, the government side, and also public transportation, for example. Right, so they're all happening. Okay, so right now, from the when we consider this enterprise usages of WIMAX, you cannot ignore Wi-Fi. Because Wi-Fi has already happened, already deployed in many cases globally. Right. So the vision here we have is Wi-Fi is currently available, very broadly deployed, and next step will be WIMAX and Wi-Fi together. Actually, at this point, there are a number of devices already with Wi-Fi and WIMAX on them. For example, right now the laptops and certain netbooks and MIDs already have a dual radio. Okay, Wi-Fi and WIMAX available. The next phase we see that they're going to be broadly used by many of the market places, right? Including in addition to consumer market, but also maybe some vertical market, as we see here. And the devices shown right now, they're already available in the market, right? As I mentioned earlier, there are 120 device vendors now making those devices, right? So that's the situation right now. Okay, when we consider technology, right, Wi-Fi versus the WIMAX, we see pretty much these two technologies are complementary. So in a way, Wi-Fi is very good for high-speed data, right? Very fast path for data delivery, carry very high-speed data. Okay, but WIMAX is less data speed, but better QoS. So in terms of the data management. Right. So WIMAX can also consider as a super Wi-Fi in the case it has a similar architecture technology. So in terms of the overall stack, the network stack, and also the architecture side, right? So in addition, WIMAX is available today, and in addition, there are a number of base stations types coming up. Right now, there are picocells also coming up, available from several vendors, from ZTE, Huawei, Samsung, for example, right? So in addition to the WIMAX limitations, for example, in the QoS space, and Wi-Fi, WIMAX is quite capable in terms of the QoS side, and also has a broader coverage. So the summary here is basically combine these two, you have a much broader coverage, better traffic in terms of QoS and also security, right? So that's why combine these two makes sense, in particular for the enterprise space. So that's what we see here. And there's some work being ongoing here right now in industry to combine these two and to make this two technology unify in terms of the architecture, actually quite successful. For example, you can see here in the access layer, in the network access layer, you can see here, right? There's a very similar set of components are being developed called Wi-Fi or WIMAX gateway. They're considered. They have the ASN gateway. They have the base station. They have the foreign agent. Right, together they form a consistent architecture in the access layer. In the backend, the backend architecture, they're also quite similar, right? So basically, you have the HA, right, the home agent. You have the AAA in terms of the security authentication side of it, right? So overall, you can see, put them together, you can see from the front-end client to the back-end core architecture, you can have a very unified architecture. And this is good for the enterprise usage of WIMAX, because when you consider how to use WIMAX in the enterprise, right, you have to consider inter-working with Wi-Fi, so architecturally, and this is the one is happening. Okay. Anyway, so we're considering right now a layered architecture, right? WIMAX on top of Wi-Fi. Together with that unified architecture, you can use it with a increased capability in terms of your enterprise network infrastructure, right? Basically, Wi-Fi for indoors. Right, maybe in addition to Wi-Fi, you may have picocell for the multimedia, right, using smaller devices indoors, and microcell for outdoor on campus, and the macrocell big base stations for the outdoor coverage. So altogether, you can have a more complete picture in terms of how you enable network interconnectivity between Wi-Fi and WIMAX, between outdoor and indoor. Together, you form a complete picture here. So this architecture shown here is for a building environment. It actually can be applied to university campuses, other situations like oil fields, railways. Basically, we have a pilot going in many of the verticals we're talking about already. Okay, so here the overall vertical picture where we can see here, right? In terms of applications, the typical ones are WIMAX good at, for example, video conferencing, right? Multimedia